Ronna, what is an issue that you are passionate about that the Green Party has been involved with?
The party started running candidates in New London in 2001, kind of came together during the whole Fort Trumbull eminent domain dispute, and the Green Party definitely saw it as a social and economic justice issue, having working class owners, kind of robbed of their rights, especially if they lived in urban areas, because people who lived in the suburbs probably wouldn't have to worry about having their homes taken for economic development. So that was a big issue for us, and that was one of the things that helped grow the New London Green Party. Every so often, like every 5 years, a big issue comes along, and that was so I guess partly I feel always kind of confident that if there is a moral political issue, that the Green Party generally has the right stand on it. Well, the Fort Trumbull group still gets together. As I said, we were not pioneers in that group exactly, but I think around 1999 there was a group of people who would walk around the Fort Trumbull area once a week and pray at various locations of houses were that were threatened. Bob joined the group after the elections in 2001. But when I was working, when I was on summer vacation or when I had a day off, I would do it. But I wasn't really part of it permanently until I retired. But that group still gets together every Friday morning for coffee. Usually Lloyd and Sandy Beachy are there, Susan Munger. She and her late husband, Neil Oldham, were very active in that whole battle. Fred Paxton and Sylvia Malizia are there often. Heather Grigsby is there. Bob and I are there. So actually some long-term bonds were formed during that period. And most of us don't socialize with each other the rest of the week, but if we're in town, we're there.
How long were you a teacher for?
Gosh, it was off and on. In Israel, I kind of was pushed into working with newborns. I did that for about a year, but I wasn't certified or anything. There was child care. The Israeli system where we lived was communal child care, and I could probably do a whole set of, shows on that, but children grew up more with their peer groups than with their families. So after I had one child, I kind of knew how to take care of babies, and they needed someone to take care of the infants, so I took care of infants for a year. And then I came back to the States, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a few years. I won't say I liked it, but I did it. And then when I was getting back into the workforce, I started cooking at child care centers, and I did that in Portland, Oregon, and then I did it when I moved to Connecticut in 1977. I did that for a few years, and then I ended up with this cook teacher aide position at Waterford Head Start in the mid-1980s. And the teacher I worked with was not very good. And I thought, if I'm going to work with kids, I need to be in charge. I mean, it sounds awful, but I felt like that. So at that point, almost 20 years after I had left school, I went back to school. I went back to Eastern to, pursue early childhood education. I never got certification because I never wanted to work in a public school, but I took every class except for student teaching. After I finished that, I worked at the Lawrence and Memorial Child Care Center from 1989 to, 2000, maybe 4 years ago. I was teaching, home visiting, all kinds of different situations mostly with very young kids.
What did you like most about that work?
I really liked, during the 12 years I worked as a home visitor for Head Start, working with the whole family. At that time, I had they called it a caseload, not a class, of 11 or 12 students, mostly 3-year-olds, a couple of 4-year-olds, and I would visit them in their homes once a week. And then 2 times a week for 2 hours each, that same group that I visited would come together for a play group. So I think the best thing about not just that job, but all kinds of early childhood education jobs is I've never been cut out to be a specialist. I never wanted to know everything there is to know about one little facet of the universe. I really like getting my hands in everything. So I think really for me, teaching very young kids was great. You know, you need to know about teaching, but you need to know how to do CPR. You need to know health things. You need to know child development things. I needed to learn social worker things. I needed to be able to, there is even subject matter with 3-year-olds. There are specific developmental things they have to learn. So I think the best thing about it was I had to know something about everything, but not necessarily everything about anything.
What would your future self remember about you at this time in your life?
I guess how surprising it is that how good it is actually to get to be older. I guess it would be more surprising to hear from a older self to a younger me. But, when I was in my 20s, 30s, even into 40s, I really thought that, getting older was, I don't know, it sounded like a drag, really. It didn't sound that exciting. But it's really great. I retired about 4 years ago, and now I don't have an alarm in the morning. I can be busy, but it's a different kind, I can choose what I do. And so I think it's a good bit of advice to look back on is, not to be afraid of all the changes that happen as your life goes through all its different stages, because each stage does have its own virtues and its own, meaningful pieces of it.
Do you have a favorite memory?
What I talked about before, going downtown by myself with one other girl, it sounds really funny, but that feeling of feeling competent at a young age and being trusted to be in a position to, be able to take care of myself very young it's surprisingly, it really stuck with me. And you'd think, things like, well, having my first child born or my first grandchild born, those are great things. But in terms of things that I just felt pleasure that was my own and not just because things were wonderful around me, I really liked all those times I got to, wander around the big cities by myself, knowing that I could take care of myself.
What are some of your goals?
I don't have much in the way of personal goals, I guess. I found that every piece of my life seems very separate from the one before. It's like I had my growing up years, and then I had my young parent years, and then I had my work years and retirement years. And what's happened with each of those periods of my life is that I never really set out to have goals, specific goals. I just kind of went with where it led me, and meaningful things happened. So, obviously, I'd love to, live long enough to see I have 2 grandkids. They're very young. One's 3.5, one's 1.5. And of course, I'd love to see them grow up. I have goals for New London, would be great to see the street grid put back together. That's probably farther off than my grandkids going off to college. But, I've been pretty happy, with my life without really planning too much ahead.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I always have to fight the urge to want to be like the hero and, have grandiose plans of saving the city or saving something. And I try not to do that. Superpower, I don't know. I honestly don't really think I need a superpower. a little bit of a greener, maybe be able to weed faster because it takes so long. Now at Riverside Park, one of our goals is to get rid of invasives. So I guess a superpower would be like getting all the invasive species out and being able to do that really fast, really efficiently. But yeah, it's a pretty modest superpower.
What scares you?
Big things. There have been many times over the past centuries that people have said, the world is coming to an end. It's scary to me that it really could. Like, we have the means to wreck life on Earth. And even if we might not have the means to wreck all life on Earth, we could certainly wreck human life on Earth. It's frightening to me. I have kids, I have grandkids, I have young neighbors. It's very frightening to me to think what kind of world we are leaving to the future generations. I was really fortunate in when I grew up. Not that there were not hardships, but, there was a time when, although the 50s were a very repressed time, as I grew up, I could see the world getting less and less repressed and people being able to express themselves more freely in so many ways. But at the same time, we were living with this myth that resources are infinite and nothing we do will really wreck the earth. Well, some of the things we've done are wrecking the earth, and resources are finite. And I'm afraid that I think it's possible for us to adapt fast enough, but I'm afraid we won't have the will to adapt fast enough. And, it could be a bleak future.
What's the best advice you've been given?
I probably was at some point given really good advice that I ignored. I'm not really good at either giving advice or taking advice. All of my jobs were in places where I could be pretty autonomous, but I always avoided places where I would supervise other people. So I don't know if anyone ever gave me this advice, but I think I would say I had some internal voice, at least, saying, just take care of yourself and don't really worry about what other people are doing. Just have responsibility for your own person. And maybe someone has said that to me, but because I've internalized it, but I don't remember who or when. What
character traits do you rely on when you need to get through difficult moments?
I'm really stubborn. I think that, I say it, and it sounds like a joke, but it really isn't, that working with young kids, especially toddlers, for whom power and control issues are really big, that kind of prepared me for a lot of political battles. So I think I have a pretty decent sense of what things to just let go and what things to really dig in your heels with, and with the things that I really want to think are important enough to dig in, I'm really stubborn. I think it's good. I think that's really helped me a lot. There have been many things that have happened over my life that people have thought I would just lose interest and go away. And sometimes it's been important that I not go away. It's meant something. So I think stubbornness. The only other thing is you have to kind of not take yourself too seriously, because even though things might be awful in some ways, there's no point living a life where you feel grim all the time. So, you might as well be a cheerful warrior if you're going to be a warrior.
If in 5 years,
yeah,
if you could walk by yourself, what would you like to see?
That's a good question. My life is really at a place where I never imagined that, I'm in my late 60s, that my life would be really content, but it really is. So I guess, one of the things that I'm usually happiest doing is, out in a garden, either planting or weeding or watering or whatever. And I think, looking back at myself, I think that is something that I would like to see. It isn't just about, the weeds and the plants, but it's about just, reversing the, any kind of entropic destruction that's happening. Just, bringing things into some kind of rational, positive thing by very small acts.
What is your definition of success?
I think the most important piece of success is being happy living with yourself, because really we are stuck with that, and you can look around you and at people with tremendous resources, power, economic, well-being, and you just see that, how can they wake up and look at themselves in the morning? And so, what good would it be to be successful in a very tangible, way that gives you power or wealth if you just feel horrible hanging out with yourself? So I think really just feeling comfortable, being yourself is really the most successful thing you can do.
What inspires you?
Some people that have inspired me, people who have, Lloyd Beachy was one of the first people we met in New London who had really taken up a cause. And I get really inspired by people who just can stand up against the crowd and not grandstand, but not back down, and just, say what needs to be done and what needs to be said, what needs to be done, even if it's not going to win friends, it's not going to win votes, it might have people snubbing you in hallways, but knowing that, you're going to be on the right side of history, and that's how you can live with yourself. So I think that's seeing people do that, whether they're just, neighbors standing up, kids standing up to a bully, or people in positions of some power. I find it really inspiring to know that there are people who have that kind of courage.
What is your favorite color?
I guess it's got to be green. I don't think it always was green, but it's become green. I spend a lot of time out in the vegetation.
What's your favorite food?
I don't know if it's my favorite food, but I'll tell you, when I walk by an Indian restaurant, it's sort of comfort food. It's so, you think, I grew up in the United States, Jewish family, chicken soup would be comfort food, but no, it's like curry is comfort food. So I don't know if it's really always my favorite, but I always it lowers my blood pressure just to smell it.
Favorite movie? One
that I've watched many times when the world just seems oppressive. We watched The Princess Bride. There are greater movies and more, some that I've really gotten a lot out of intellectually and emotionally. But, for me, I have to say that movies are kind of escapism.
What is your favorite sound?
I don't know. I don't know if I have one. I have to say when I'm in my car usually, or when I'm at home alone, I keep it quiet. I spend a lot of time out in the world talking to people. I do go out listening to music in town. When I was on the Board of Ed and really involved in politics, I really liked going to the downtown bars and listening to music, because I felt like that was like the real New London that was more nurturing than the political scene. But when I have my choice, actually, I like silence.
What is one thing you would like to do that you have not done yet?
I guess I'd like to do a little more traveling. There was a decade that I lived in a lot of different places. I've lived, on the West Coast, in Oregon. I've lived in Israel. But I really haven't gotten around to see some parts of the world that I think would be really interesting. Some parts of South America I'd love to see. And I guess now that I'm retired, I can do it. But it's just, I don't know, inertia is hard to counteract. But I think getting around and spending time in other countries and other cultures is something I would enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ronna, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.